Okay, great. So, yeah, so let's talk a little bit more about Kol de Alim Gavar. So again, just to remind everybody what it is. So this is the Gemara in Bava Basra. The Gemara in Bava Basra says that if two people are in a dispute over the ownership of an object, um, it happens to be a case. The first case there is a case of a boat. Everybody knows it is the case of the boat, but it doesn't have to be a boat. Doesn't matter. Arva means a boat or a ship. So anyway, each one is claiming that he is the sole owner of this object. There's no further evidence. So the rule is that we say kol the alim gavar. Whoever is alim, alim is alimut in Hebrew means stronger. So whoever is stronger, whoever is mightier, wins. And we've been discussing how that could be. How could it be that very cerebral, justice-oriented, protective of the weak, and the noble, Judaism? How could it have a law in the books that says that the mightiest, vanquishes or wins, and he walks away with an object? Very strange. And as I mentioned, the Tur, who's the son of the Rush, and in this context, it's an important irony. The Tur, when he wants to use an expression to explain why we need kosher mishpat, an efficient legal system and manner of civil law, so he wants to highlight the need for order out of chaos and a system of justice that would prevent people from just eating each other up. So he uses two phrases, more than two, but two phrases that he likes to use. One is from Pirkei Avos, which is Ishas Kavero Chayim Bilao. Like each person will swallow, if it wasn't a judicial, a civil legal system, each person would swallow up his neighbor. Ishas Kavero, right? Chayim Bilao, he would swallow him up. That's one phrase. That's not connected to what we're doing. The other phrase, he says, if it wasn't for a civil legal Jewish law, then you'd just you'd say Kol Alim Gavar, whoever is stronger, whoever is mightier wins. That would be intolerable. But the irony, of course, is that we do say Kol Alim Gavar, but only in very strict circumstances. So we've been trying to explain what those circumstances are. So we already discussed the position of the Rosh, I believe, last time. I don't think we discussed the tshuva of the Rosh, but we discussed the psychology of the Rosh. I'm going to get to the tshuva of the Rosh in just a minute. But the contribution of the Rosh is, let me say before we get to the Rosh, I'll tell you what the more standard view. The more standard view is that the justification for saying Kol de Alim Gavar is that we don't have a means really to come to a conclusion because we don't have sufficient evidence that points decisively to one side over the other. So in the absence of that, whatever decision we would make would be questioned and would be, based on something subjective, and it wouldn't bring honor to Bezdin. So let me explain a little bit about what we mean when we talk about honor of Bezdin. No one's suggesting that Jewish courts are infallible. They're operated by human beings. The only infallible being in the universe is the Rabbanu Shalom. Human beings can always make a mistake, and we're charged, to try to do a good job and to try to be just and fair and noble and idealistic. But in the end of the day, only the Rabbanu Shalom is infallible. So the phrase zilusa de bedina, that we're chayshina zilusa de bedina, that we're concerned, about the reputation. We don't want to embarrass the Bezdin, has nothing to do with infallibility, and it has nothing to do. It's not a cover up either. It's not a way of avoiding transparency. But what it is it's based on the principle that the court system is the foundation of Jewish life. Without it, right, there would be no cohesive society. And therefore, there's a desire to project confidence in that system. And one of the ways you do that is to make sure that all rulings have a foundation and a basis. That doesn't mean that they're infallible, but that they operate according to not an arbitrary, but a certain, standard of objectivity and and fairness. In order to do that, you have to be willing when there are cases that fall, the resolution of which falls under that standard, meaning less than that standard, you have to be willing to walk away from those cases. You have to be able to disengage. Sometimes you have to be able to say, you know what, there's going to be another system, another track, we'll call it, of justice, which um, is going to decide this particular issue because it doesn't meet the gold standard of proof, of evidence in the courts, and the need for confidence in the courts is such that it's better to operate with a different track, which is more subjective or more oriented simply to creating, or terminating strife, and reimposing, a state of tranquility, than the actual justice itself. So that's the idea that we've been explaining. That's how most of the Rishonim, the Rimigash, the Ramban, I believe the Rambam, I'll get to the Rambam hopefully in a couple of minutes. We'll see the Shita Lonodalami. And, even the Russian, one of the places, we didn't do the tshuva yet, so we'll discuss the tshuva in just a minute. That's their position. Their position is that Kol de Alam Gavar is what we call a siluk. Siluk means, that they are withdrawing. The bezin is withdrawing or disengaging, and they're allowing some other mechanism, to take over. That's like the widespread view of what Kol de Alam Gavar is. The exception is the view of the Rush, but then it becomes a little complicated. So the view of the Rush, as we've already seen, we saw it in Bava Kama, in Bava Metzia and Bava Basra. And it almost uses the exact same language, the Rush, in both places. And we'll see in a minute, we're going to read the Tshuva, where also he uses very similar language.
It's the same as when one forgives a debt, whether it's a siluk or it's when one forgives a debt to somebody, is one removing the kinyan, or is one just removing oneself from seems to be some kind of machlokas on that issue also.
What do you mean if one is?
In other words, if somebody, Reuben says to Shimon, I owe you $100, just forget it.
That's mechila.
Yeah, it's mechila. Is that a siluk or is that a?
Oh, there's a question whether the same word, but that's a little bit different. Meaning, there we're talking about what is the nature of mechila. Is mechila kind of a kinyan? Is it ki'ilu hiskabalti? Is says, oh, it's counted as if I, as if I received it, or is it a kind of just see? Look, he's walking away. He's dropping his right, to collect. Yeah, I mean, the word has something in common, but here it's a little bit different. Here, what we're saying is the Bezdin, according to this perspective, the Bezdin, has determined that it doesn't have the means, according to its own standards, which are good for Klal Yisrael, as I said before, to encourage confidence in the system. So they don't have the means to resolve this issue. So they would rather disengage from it. And that's what the language of siluk is. Yeah, no, you're right. The word siluk appears in many contexts. For example, Yerusha, like if a person is an heir to an estate, the Gemara in Perek HaKosev, in the ninth parak of Ksuvas, has a whole discussion. Can he be? Let's say can he be mistalek from his Yerusha? Can he say, I don't want to be an heir, to this, to this.
Especially if he's a bechor, sometimes it's in his interest to give it up.
A bechor, a pashut, whatever the case is. The word siluk just means in Hebrew, and it's a legal term. It means, again, to disengage, to walk away from something. Now, of course, walking away in different contexts, may have different legal significance. Enodoma Yerusha, to what you mentioned, Gebias Chov. For example, can you be mochel on an object? It's one thing to be mochel on the collection of a loan, right? Because that the collection is still a process. So I can say, you know what, this is a process. Especially, by the way, in a loan, we say milva lahotzan nitna. So the actual money belongs to the love. The Malva has a right of collection. So his sila can be, I'm giving up my right of collection. That's different than, let's say I have an object in my possession and I say, you know what, I'm no longer
The
um,
owner of that.
claiming ownership on this object. I'm being the stale bimenu. And that might be different because it's not as if, it's something that he owns. So can he just walk away from it, or does he have to give it away? Maybe can it be mafkirid? Well, what exactly is that? So the word siluk just means disengage or walk away from. But of course, depending on the context, it can be the decision not to pursue a right or a prerogative, or it can be an act of hakna'ah, or mechila or hefker. So yeah, but in the case of Bezin, none of that is relevant. In the
And
case of Bezin, we're talking about
Bezin's vehicle for doing this is Hefka Bezin Hefka.
no. In this case, no, um, no. The idea is that this is something that normally would come into their jurisdiction,
So they have an
right? And
obligation, do they not?
well, no, well, that's the whole point. The point is that if this is something which doesn't read down to their credit because they can't apply proper standards to it, then it doesn't come under their obligation. But of course, they can't ignore it. They need to give guidance. So what they're telling, according to this view, what they're telling the protagonists is, in this situation, we will not give our imprimatur on the solution because the evidence is too minuscule, for us to get actively involved. But the halacha, not us, we, not, judge A, judge B, and judge C, but the halacha broadly, Choshen Mishpat, the book, the whatever you want to call it, determines in that case that kol de alim gavar, that there's
That
another
would
way.
never occur by Heter Isser, would it?
Say that again.
That would never occur by Heter Isser, only by Dine Mamonis.
Right, because if you're talking
That's
about
why I'm thinking that maybe Hefka Bezin Hefka is the vehicle by
yeah, no,
which.
you don't need Hefker Bez and Hefker because it's only an interim solution, as we discussed. Again, if either party comes to court
With
tomorrow
evidence.
or in 10 years or in 50 years, with proper evidence, then this case is going to be resolved according to the evidence. So it's partly it's the fact that we just we don't want to leave things in limbo because that festers and it causes strife. So we'd prefer that there be at least a temporary or an interim solution, and that's what Kol Alm Gavar is. But it's not Hefker Bezin Hefker because no one's giving up their long-term rights. And as I say, if you bring evidence, in fact, the Gemara itself says this. I mean, the Gemara on Lamed Hayom and Aleph in Bava Basra, as we've discussed, asks the following question. The Gemara says, "How comes we say Kol Alm Gavar in the case of the boat?" But we say what we call shuda dedaini, which is also a topic, and or yachloku, maklokes between Rab and Shmuel. When it comes to the case of shnei shtaros hayot symbiom echad, when you have two parties that come to court,
Same
and
date.
each one has a contract which seems to indicate that he was gifted or sold a piece of real estate. But it was dated on the same day, and in a way that even if you had further information, according to many Rishonim anyway, it wouldn't make a difference because the contract only kicks in, the last minute of the day. The contract kicks in 11, 59 and 59 seconds, moving to into the next day because it says Tuesday. So until the last possible second before the beginning of Wednesday, that's when the contract actually starts. So the contract starts for both people at the same time. We're not talking about a hoax, meaning the owner really did write these two contracts. So that's where there we say yachloku, or we say shuta the dining. So the Gemara says, why don't you say kolam dalam gavar in the boat case, and why do you say either yachlok or shuta in this case? So the Gemara says the following distinction. The Gemara says in the case of kol dalam gavar ika leukma amilsa, which means that the evidence is not, we're not ruling out future evidence. There's every good reason to think that this is only an interim solution, but that ultimately this will be resolved according to the gold standard of Edus or Hoda or Shtar or something like that. And for that reason, you say Kol Dalim Gava. However, in the case of Shtei Shtar Sayotzu B'Yam says the Gemara, it's Leika Leukma Allah de Milsa.
Excellent.
You have all the evidence, and the problem is you can't move from that because all things being equal, it seems like there can't be further evidence that will clarify in a decisive way, who wins this case. So that's a very important distinction. But what it highlights is that Kol Dalam Gavar only applies as an interim solution. Now, there are some Rishonim who actually seem to say that, that part of what because then we started out by saying, how could you justify might is right as a halachic solution? So partly the answer is we have no choice. We're disengaging. It's better to find some informal mechanism than it is to tarnish the standards of Bezdin because we want Bezdin to be, an institution that has the confidence of all the people. So that's one aspect. But that, you can make that case far more strongly if you also add, and by the way, no one is saying this is the final disposition of the case. This is the interim disposition. If you want to say, oh, so why don't you just keep it in limbo? Well, we don't know when the evidence is going to come in. We don't know that it will come in, but there's no reason to think that it won't. And there's nothing about what we're doing. That's why I say it's not Hefker. Hefker Bezin. Hefker means that Bezin has the capacity in Dine Maminis to confiscate money and to give it to someone else. That's not what's happening. That's not what's happening here. Des Bezin is disengaging, and they're saying, you know what? Call us back when there's more evidence. But for now, we need to move on, and the way we're moving on is called Alam Gava. That's the more typical view of called Alam Gava. The other perspective is also informed, and the question is, how different is it by the Rush? And that, as we've discussed, the Rush says that you can also be somech on a psychological
Advantage.
a psychological factor as well. And that is that the person, who is the real owner is going to put up a greater struggle because he is motivated, by his own interest and his knowledge that he is, in the right. People who his righteousness, impassions him and motivates him to be more tenacious. And by the same token, the other fellow is plagued by the fact that Gazlan, will call him, meaning the guy who's just, pretending to be the owner. So he's trying to do mischief, and he's a Gazlan, but he's,
Uh,
a good professional
uh,
Gazlan.
I argued this last time, the last cycle we learned this, but I
Yeah.
would argue, and I guess I'm wrong according to Gemara, that when you really own something, you're like, it's mine. I'm not like, there's a psychology. I don't have to fight for it. It's mine.
Well,
But
you have to fight for it if the other person is grabbing it and or contending that that it's not yours.
there's certain people that like, they just they don't want to fight. It doesn't mean that they don't own it. It just
Right. No,
you
this is
know
not. No one thinks that
this is like the Mitt Romney Donald Trump argument. Like, Trump will kill you to win. Romney wouldn't get his hands dirty. He lost. You know what I'm saying? It
Well,
didn't mean
that's
he
to
wasn't.
win something. That's
Yeah.
different than the sense of justice of somebody allowing somebody to take something away from you is what I'm trying to say. No, you're quite right that the different personalities are going to handle things in a different way. There are people who are fighters, and even if they're thieves, they don't give up. There are people who own an object and it's not worth it for them to fight
But
over
but
money or
it's
Right.
not just fighting. It's the person who really owns it knows there's evidence out there somewhere to support him, so he's going to look for it. Person
yeah.
who
Well,
made
so
Yeah,
that's what
but
the
but
Rosh
but
said.
but,
knows
but,
there's no way he's going to find anything.
what does that have to do with? What does that have to do with? We're talking about Kol Da'olam Gaver is about fighting. It's not about evidence, Andy. It's
No, but
about
No,
that's
no, it's not
the
about fighting. It's about
it's about both.
come
It's
back to
about
us when you have the evidence.
right. It's about koach and rigma. That's what the Rashbam and others say, koach or raya. But remember, as long as you bring evidence, at any point you win the case.
hold on. I thought Kol Da'olam Gaver, which you've been trying to explain this for the last few weeks to help us, was basically a strength of a fight.
It's also that, but as an interim solution. Either
Uh,
way,
Kol Da'olam Gaver doesn't mean bring raya. I mean, you don't. That's not bringing a raya is like the factual way to do things. Kol
right,
Da'olam
right, right,
Gaver,
right. But
what was the boxing match? It's a boxing match.
so the
It's a
Rashbam
strong
says
no win.
it's right. The Rashbam in Bava Basra says, "O bekocho, o berayos." What he means by rayos is unclear because he's talking about a real raya, which you're saying is correct. That's just, of course, that's obvious. So there are those who think that um, lesser evidence, which normally wouldn't be accepted into the court, in a kol da'alam gavar context, if they want to if it wants to be like, would like lower the standards of evidence, not in the long term, but at least in the short term, to award a person, the interim, victory. But I don't want to get into that right now. But that's what the Rashbam is assuming. Either way, what the Rush is saying is not 100%. What the Rush uses the language in all three places of besomchin. Besomchin means we rely on it, meaning it's an additional reinforcement, to this perspective. But the point is that it isn't completely a disengagement, and therefore just like let the reality unfold, however it unfolds. It is, according to the Rush at least, there is an element of birur, not birur gamor, but some birur along with this as well. And again, it's not just about the victor; it's also about the investment. If you're a professional crook, right, and hopefully none of us know this, but I'm just saying, if one were to be a professional crook, part of your professionalism, I guess, and your effectiveness is to know, what targets to go after, and
Right.
also how much to invest, in terms of the struggle, in those marks, we'll call it, as well. So part of what the Rush says is there's a double psychology here. The real owner, has like a burning, righteous indignation, that motivates him because he knows this is a miscarriage of justice. This fellow's a lie, other fellow's a liar, and he also has an emotional bond and just the normal, natural tendency to want to hold on to what is his. So that
Right.
all that tenacity and
Yeah,
passion.
but that could work in all due
That's
respect.
one. And let me finish. Let me
That could
wait,
work
wait, wait,
the
wait,
opposite way.
let me finish the
Work
sentence.
the opposite way. That when you know you're the rightful owner, you know that
Right.
God runs the world.
Yeah.
So the whole world is sheker, and the guy's gonna go to hell. So who cares? Meaning, let
Well,
him lie,
Well,
let him
still,
kill.
when that's his
I don't know
past, then
anybody
who cares?
who is so passive, but meaning
What do
if
you mean?
you,
Everything's gamzula tov. If a guy's going after you, come on.
it's not
I,
gamzula tova if somebody is a thief. You shouldn't be letting somebody steal from you.
By the
That's
way,
not
the
a
court
gamzula.
is really taking a position that's somewhat similar to what the courts do here when they say you have no standing. In other
Yeah.
words, what the court is saying to these two people is until you can bring evidence of some sort,
No, that's the first.
you
That's the
don't have
seal.
standing in front of us. We can't do anything. We'd love
That's
to.
the Sealuk view.
The Supreme Court does that many times.
Yeah.
They would love to take the case, but for some technical reason,
They
you
throw
have
it
no
out for lack
standing.
of evidence or whatever. But that's the Silo case. What I'm saying is that the Rush is suggesting that there's an element of beer. Now the element of beer is on both sides. It's on the side of the person who is righteously indignant, and also more, has more adrenaline because he feels that a miscarriage of justice is being done. And again, it's good to be not materialistic, Jacob. That's a wonderful thing, but that doesn't I mean, even Yaakov Avinu went back for his, Pachim Ketanim. There's also respect for the fact that you have wherewithal, if you assuming you got it in an honorable way, and you're not supposed to just let other people take or steal if you want to give away your money for philanthropic reasons or to help other people, that's as a voluntary action, that's a wonderful thing. That's different than allowing people, unscrupulous people,
usually spiritual people, like their monetary things don't define them. So
doesn't define them, but it's still wrong, meaning it's still gezel, and that's a terrible.
So Rebbe's saying that if someone's stealing from you,
You should not let someone steal from you.
You should, meaning even though Hashem knows they're a thief and they're going to go to Gehenna, but you have to do your part to
Yes,
fight.
for sure. Justice is very important, 100%. So that's one. The other side, as I said, is that if you're a professional thief or just an intelligent thief, so you're part of being good at it is knowing, what to.
Allocation of resources.
So again, you're not going to invest. It's might as well take a shot at it. But if he's going to eventually bring evidence, and and you're going to lose the case, it's not worth your thief time. And also, it'll obviously expose you as a thief. So you have to decide, whether or not you're, this is a worthwhile.
That's why when they asked Dillinger why he robs banks, he said that's where the money is. Thieves go where the opportunity exists.
Right. But again, if exactly, he wasn't going for more difficult goals, right? Exactly. Anyways, that's the rush. So what we discussed last week was two things. Number one, the rush has a second chiddush. So these are the two broad views. But Jacob, you're right on one thing. You're certainly right, and that is that this psychology is not foolproof, and it doesn't apply in all cases. Sometimes you get a very, particularly adamant thief and a more passive, owner. You're correct in that respect.
No. What I'm saying is it can work both ways. When
No, I understand what you're saying.
When you know you're in the right, you sometimes you don't have to.
That's true in an argument, or in in many other things. Two people are arguing and say, "Listen, I know I'm right. I don't need to argue about this anymore. It's clear to me." Like, who are you trying to convince? But the idea of trying to protect or defend, your rights against the encroachment, the illegal and unethical encroachment of someone else, you're not supposed to be passive. And again, you're not supposed to put yourself in mortal danger. That's a different story. I mean, there are limits, and it's not supposed to, occupy the totality of your, existence and your attention. You have to be able to move on if you lose the case, and so on and so forth. All the, positive aspects of not being materially obsessed that you described are all true. But that doesn't mean that you don't have the right, even the obligation, to protect what is legitimately yours. What did Yaakov Avinu do with Lavan, right? He was very open-minded in a way, and he was very, but he didn't want to be an easy prey, an easy mark. That's what he was saying. You keep stealing from me, and I'm not going to allow it. Right? And he was Yaakov Avinu, Ishtam, Yoshev Aholim, the Bechir Ha'avos, the Midah of, Tiferes. He also went back for Pachim Ketanim because, it's like Baltashkis, or it's a lack of gratitude to the Ribono Shel Olam. If you just play food fast and loose. That doesn't mean he was obsessed with his material possessions, Chalila. And when he encountered Esav,
Well,
again, according to the psukim in Vayishlach, he knew exactly how to present himself.
By the way, this could be a lesson the other way, which is, in other words, when Hashem gives you something,
you
have to value it, and you're not supposed to be,
Right. That's exactly what I'm saying. There's an Isra Baltashkis,
Right.
And
Like people throw things out that they should give
well,
it away.
I'm not discussing the parameters. There's some things you should throw out, but
Yeah,
there are, but
there's some people they throw out when they throw out their clothes every year, whatever. They're.
yeah, that's well probably yeah. So, but the idea of gratitude and appreciation, and the idea of not squandering resources, is a very important theme. Very
Right.
important.
You also have to know
And
how to exist in a world that unfortunately has evil in it.
say again.
You have to know how to exist in a world that unfortunately has evil.
Yeah, no,
Well,
no.
Yaakov went
You
to
definitely don't want to
Hashem
be
Re'eva
encouraging, right? You don't want,
to learn how to deal
right.
with love him.
By the way, I mean,
So-
even in this topic itself, we've been again, we're going to go a lot farther field, but it's really part of the topic. When we were discussing Yehi Munach Ad Sheyavu Eliyahu, right? So one of the big, most important themes is the position of Rabbi Yossi, who says Shelo Yehi Chote Niskar, meaning giving a victory to someone who is, a thief, or
Encourages them to, or the others to do the same.
encourages, incentivizes, more acts of
Right.
unethical behavior, which undermines society. And it's
It's
just
like
that's the pragmatic part, but it's just plain wrong. It's just there's something unjust about the chote,
right.
being this car. So the idea again, that doesn't mean you should be obsessed. That there are points beyond which you shouldn't.
Well, it says mishpatim. You're supposed to have judgment. So if you have policemen in New York that you rob a store, you get away with it, then everyone starts robbing, which is what we've had and what's going on
Right.
in America.
Somebody asked me the other night because I was speaking actually in my mother, the yahrzeit shirt for my mother. I was speaking about the concept of Gnei Bas Nefesh and Pidyon Shvuyim. So somebody afterwards, a student of mine said, it always struck him that in the story of the Mabul, the Torah uses the expression of Hamas, and a lot of Chazal and Rashi quotes it as well, saying that Hamas was Gezel. Um, and he said he was always struck by that. Gezel, it's just money, you know. But the bigger point was that when theft becomes acceptable in society, it undermines the pillars of justice, and it affects everything else as well.
Right.
Um, Again, I was speaking last night a little bit about again Pidyon Shvuyim and about Gnevas Nefesh, which is kidnapping. So it's a very fascinating thing that in the Aseret Adibros, again, I don't want to go, you don't need to hear the whole speech, but in the Aseret Adibros, one of this Losignov. Losignov is not stealing money; it's stealing, it's kidnapping basically, and it's a capital offense. But what's interesting is that the Chazal, it doesn't say in the pasuk that it's Gnevas Nefesh. It just says Losignov, and the Chazal had to prove that it referred to Gnevas Nefesh because it's a capital offense, and you wouldn't have a capital offense for theft. But what the Mepharshim point out is that it's not a coincidence that the Torah didn't explicate it, because there is a connection between Gnevas Mammon and Gnevas Nefashos. Meaning, if you disrespect people's property, and you think you can just, whatever you can get away with, you can do, then it's just a hop, skip, and a jump, from Gnevas Mammon to Gnevas Nefashos. So what they're suggesting is the Torah in the Aseret Adibros used a term which we normally associate with monetary theft intentionally, even though it doesn't mean that, but it's drawing a connection, between lawless behavior and disrespect for boundaries and disrespect for other people's rights, and how easily that can deteriorate into, denying somebody freedom, and choice, and autonomy, which of course is a terrible thing, and also jeopardizing their, their life in a certain way, which is also part of the Yosef story. So, yeah, no, you're quite right that one has to be careful to keep in proportion and in perspective, the difference between, material loss and material acquisition on the one hand, and the greater goal of living, an ethical and a moral and especially a spiritual and religious life, being a Ben Torah, being an Eved Hashem. those are, there's a priority and a hierarchy, but that's still different. Just because you're not materially focused or obsessed doesn't mean you don't have every right to protect, what legitimately you need or you own, and just to be defiant of people who disrespect those boundaries, and try to exploit somebody, knows that somebody is spiritually focused. So they exploit that, for their own personal gain. That's a terrible thing. So the principle of shelo yehei chote niskar, not giving a victory to somebody who, is oppressive or evil or even just a thief, is a very important concept in Judaism. It's not like Christianity has a, supposedly on the books, it's not something
Turn
that
the
their
other cheek.
bloody history, really
Yeah,
reinforces. But on the books, at least, their
turn the other.
Christianity is a, turn the other cheek, religion. We're not a turn the other cheek religion at all. Um, in theory, even, we speak about if we have implacable enemies, we'd rather that they repent or rather not have them. But when we do, our perspective is that that's, something that needs to be stamped out, and justice and retribution needs to gemulo nasa baro yasa barosho. That's the Haman story, and it's the, many other stories. You know, as listen, the brothers sold Yosef. The Mefarshim all say that, they felt they had justification. They felt that he was, going to destroy them, whatever. But at the end of the day, what they did was a heinous crime, and there are punishments for that. They were punished, and Klal Yisrael was punished. They say that,
Bayim largo, kodem largo.
what's that?
Ba'im la'argo,
Oh,
kodem
hashkem
largo.
v'hargo. Yeah, habala hargacha hashkem. Right. So the right for self-defense and also to defend your property. What is Baba Machteres? Baba Machteres is somebody. It's a fascinating thing. It means somebody breaks into your basement, and the question is, how do you, respond to that person? So let's say he breaks into your basement because he's going to steal something from you, but you don't have to allow him to steal. So you're going to confront him, but once you confront him, then he's going to get violent. So there's a certain cycle in that. But in b'machteres yimatzeh haganav, you have every right to defend yourself, and you have every right to defend your property. Now you're not going to kill somebody because he's stealing your watch per se, but uh, that's not the way it works. Once the confrontation takes place, there's a certain danger, and then you have the right of self-defense. So no, Yahadus is very, we believe in justice, and we believe in rights, and part of one's rights is one ownership rights. You have every proper, it's proper in every way for you to litigate, if somebody is taking your property. So it's not like, oh, he'll be a nice guy, he'll be more spiritual, that it's on the
The
contrary.
underlying nature of what the world, forget us as Jews, has to live by is we have dinim in the seven mitzvahs b'nei Noach, and the chayiv misa if they don't do that, because a world without some kind of a judicial
Right.
system.
Right. Again, I think it was before you came on today, but I started by mentioning something I mentioned in the past, and that is that the Torah begins Kosher Mishpat by quoting Rabbeinu Yonah, who says that the need for a Kosher Mishpat, a civil legal system, is because otherwise Ishas Chavero Chayim Bala'o, people will swallow each other up. I was just trying to point out the irony that he also uses the phrase, otherwise you'll say Kol Alam Gavar. And that's, of course, ironic because sometimes we do say, Kol Alam Gavar. But no, this idea of everybody has a right to live in a safe environment that is protected, that has laws, that contends with and neutralizes, thieves and robbers and other people who exploit, is very important. It's not more spiritual to look the other way. It's more spiritual to know, how much you want to invest in this and how it should affect other parts of your life. And of course, there are going to be circumstances where walking away is the right thing to do. But all things being equal, there's a certain gratitude and respect for the resources, that are legitimately given to you. And it's totally proper to safeguard that and to preserve it. Okay. Anyways, so I want to go now to the tshuva of the Rosh. Oh, anyway, before we get to tshuva of the Rosh. So one of the things we discussed last week, just to get us back to where we were, is the question of, when does Kol Da'alam Gavar end? When do you hear the ring, I guess, the bell, when is it all over? So the Rosh in Bava Basra says that in his opinion, it only lasts one round. Meaning you have, an initial struggle. Because anyway, but remember, it's only an interim solution. But you, in this interim solution, is determined by the first round. That's the view of the Rosh. It's interesting that the Rosh, when he says this, so I would have thought, and it might still be partially true, although it's unstated, that this is the Rosh L'Shitaso, that the Rosh is being consistent. Why? Because he's the one who psychologized Kol Da'alam Gavar. So there's an element of birur. It's not just a way of moving forward, right? There's some glimmer, or more than a glimmer, that you might have, hit upon a just resolution because of his greater tenacity and the other person's, greater awareness that he's not likely to win anyway. So if that's the case, you might think, well, one round is good enough, and it's a solution. When there's a solution, typically there's a process which has an end point. I'm making that as a broad statement, but in law, that's usually true. On the other hand, if we're talking about disengagement and say that we can't handle this case and we're not going to handle this case,
is it disengagement or
take
kicking
its
the
course.
ball? Is it disengagement or kicking the ball down the road?
Well, you're only kicking it down. It's disengagement, and you want there to be an interim, but in a way, well, I guess depends on this question, right? In a way. So meaning, if it's real disengagement, so then maybe there aren't
It's
any
over. Then you should never come back to them.
right. So then, in theory, it doesn't end after round one, right? It could be as long as it goes on. It goes on. So that is a debate between the Rishonim. The Rosh says, now it's interesting, what the curiosity that I mentioned before that I didn't follow up with is, I would have thought that the Rosh's view that limits it to one round would be consistent with his psychology, but he actually mentions it before the psychology, and he gives a different explanation. His different explanation is the goal here is to, reassert harmony in the community. And if you don't have an endpoint, then you're just encouraging
Have an open-ended feud forever.
open-ended. It's like Hatfields and McCoys. It never ends, right? I don't know if there's still Hatfields and McCoys out there. One can only hope.
But there are others like him.
Exactly.
So
But everybody gets.
Kol Da'alim Bedavar is in fact not so much a determination by the court of not only of Siluk, an extrication, but an admonition, sort of tochacha, that if you do not come to the reality of who's the real owner, the tochacha is that you have no other choice in your life but to fight.
Ooh. I don't know legally. I don't think legally that's what it is, but I think it's a very good drasha. It's good musar. What you're saying is true, and it's a good rabbinic sermonic message for sure. So, and I say that in the most complimentary way, as the son of a rabbi, but especially the son of a rabbi. It's very good. Anyways, but what the Rosh, so it's just fascinating. If you look back, I'm just going to look at it for a minute. But this is the Rosh in these Maramakomos, the one above Basra, just very quickly. He starts off Rosh Masachet Bava Basra Per Gimel Siman Chaf Beis. He says, Zelmer Shalabosa, Rav Nachman Kol Da'alam Gavar. Hi Kol Da'alam Gavar Dinahu.
Which
contrast this.
source sheet are we on now?
The source sheet that says Bekorot B'inyan Yachloku V'Kol Da'alam Gavar. It has a Rashi Tevos. It's
the 5, the 6, or the fourth with 4 pages?
how many pages?
4 pages.
4 pages.
I noticed on the YU website that you give a course to the Kew Gardens. They actually have lines, by the way, on the
Oh, in
page.
Jamaica States, you mean?
Yes, Jamaica States, yes.
And the person who does
Very,
it,
yes.
the person who I send him sources, and he numbers them. I don't do
Oh,
it. I don't know how to do it.
oh,
I'm sure it's not that hard, but he's a computer person.
The one
oh,
from December 17th, 4 pages.
4 pages. Thank you.
Yeah. 4 pages. So, anyways, the rush here,
Which page are we on now?
page number 1.
Okay. Got it.
Zelmer Shalavos, Zelmer Shalavos. This is the rush. This is the second entry. Rav Nachman called Alam Gavar. So the Rush says, "Hi, called Alam Gavar Dinahu." This is very interesting. He says it's a din. I'm going to show you the contrast in a minute. The Kol Misha Gavar Yodo Bepam Rishona, whoever overcomes the other fellow during and until the end of round number 1, being Bepam Rishona, in their first encounter, who shalo, it belongs to him, ad shiyavi chaveira raya, unless, because there's always the possibility of bringing real evidence, and then the case will be overturned. The kolzman shalo yavi raya, afim tigaver yodo, even if the other fellow makes a comeback, lo shavkinan le, we don't lafuke mine, we don't allow him to emerge victorious since it's after the first encounter. Why? It doesn't make sense that the Chachamim would allow an ongoing strife. Umachlokes, hayom yigaver zeh, umachar chaveiro. One day he's stronger, the next day the other guy is mightier. Ella Chachamim posku, right? The Chachamim determined that kol da'alim bepam azos, whoever emerges stronger in this first encounter, gavar. And then he continues with the psychology, but it's only after that, the samchu al zeh, they relied also on the fact, or they also pinned, this conclusion on an additional factor, the kol misha dinimo, whoever is in the right, karov lahavi rayos, he's the one likely to be able to prove it. Va'od, and in addition, Misha Dinimo Yimsar Nafsho, Lahamid Shalo Biyado, Mimashi Yimsar Acher Ligzol. Moreover, the adrenaline, the tenacity will be greater to the person who is driven by righteous, and justice than the person who's just trying to make a quick buck, and he's just, it's in it for as a lark. And the Od Yomar, the thief will say, "Ma betz Hashem sar nafshi vayom alamachar yavi raya biyotziani biyadi." Like, what's the point? Why should I invest so much effort if anyways he's likely to bring the evidence down the road at some point? Anyway, that's the thing. So what the point I wanted to make is that the Rush, even before the psychology, says there's only one round, and he says it's only one round as a matter of policy. But if you look on the page,
hold on, I'm sorry. If it's one round and you win the round and then he brings proof, you still have to give it back, right?
yes, proof wins no matter what. We're talking about we're talking about without
proof wins always.
Proof always wins.
So the bottom line is, if you have the whole call to Olam Gavar only works in theory mentally if you don't have proof.
Correct.
Yeah, you have proof. You're not going to waste your time getting in a fight with somebody.
Not just no waste of time. It would be the wrong thing to focus on. Of course. 100%.
Right. But when it says call to Gavar, it's telling someone advice when you don't have proof.
Yeah. It's Zelmer Shalavosai, and neither of them have any evidence. So this is what you do in the interim.
One had evidence, the court will take the case.
Yeah, if they had evidence, there wouldn't be an issue.
Yeah, but does it say somewhere, get your proof in line, or that's obvious?
Yeah, no, it's obvious, but it's also explicit. It says ikal ukme Allah de milsa. This case could still be settled in court decisively if somebody brings evidence. By the way, there's an interesting argument. The Rambam says that the case of Kol Alam Gavar applies even when, not only in case where there's no evidence, but even in cases where the evidence is equal on all sides. Like, let's say each side brings two witnesses that, this boat has been in his family for 1,000 years. I mean, I'm exaggerating, right? Or the other, but the other comes to court, and he also has two witnesses that his family is the same boat owner for 1,000 years, assuming they're not the same family, right? So the Rambam says, just because the case in the Gemara, he doesn't say these words, I'm saying it for him. Just because the case in the Gemara is a case where you have claims and no evidence, right? The same principle would apply if you had, competing claims and equal evidence. The point is that on evidence, you can't make a decision here. What would happen if going forward, we were able to disqualify one of the groups of Adim? So of course that would be decisive evidence.
And the Bezdin has no right to even suggest pshara?
Pshara is a situation where there's some ambiguity. They can suggest it, but pshara is never imposed on parties. And the typical case of pshara is where there are two sides to something, meaning each person has, some redeeming claim, and then you have to figure out, but who has a greater claim? In this case, it's
One is
just
lying, obviously.
one's a liar and the other one is the owner.
In the case of two shtar,
Yeah.
Both of the same date, but one of them also has the time and the other one doesn't
No,
have.
so the case that they're talking about, they say it's Birushalayim, and there was in that time the law was Ein Kosvin Shos Birushalayim. They didn't care. I mean, the rule was that if you had a contract in Yerushalayim in that time period, that it didn't matter what time it was delivered during the day, the effect only took place, because of the self-sufficiency of the contract. So the effect only took place at the end of the day. Right. If otherwise, that it could be that that's the argument of Shuda and Yachloka. The one who says Shuda may say, well, that isn't true. Maybe as long as you can prove that, one was given prior to the other. I mean, the Ramban discusses the following case. The Ramban says, let's say you have somebody who, let's say the writing of the shtar, but also the handing over the shtar. Let's say I wrote a shtar, meaning I wrote a contract to Ruvain, and I gave it to Ruvain at, 1 o'clock in the afternoon. And then at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I wrote another contract to Shimon, and then I gave it to Shimon. So the Ramban says nobody would say under those conditions, Yachloku. That's called Kosav Masar, Kosav Masar. Says, what's the case in the Gemara? Kosav Kasav, Masar Masar. Meaning at least he wrote both contracts before he gave it to either of them. And then he gave one over the other. But when he gave it to the first fellow, there already was a written contract, that was waiting to be given.
But outside of Yerushalayim, where the time is used.
But by the way, not everybody agrees with that Ramban, just for the record. That's the Ramban's view. The Bali Tosas don't think it's correct. Sorry, you were asking about Yerushalayim?
Outside of Yerushalayim, let's say, where they keep the time on the shtar.
Yeah.
Do they also still believe that it doesn't matter because it only comes into effect at the end of the day?
So that's what I'm saying. They very possibly. This really, again, I don't want to get into it right now.
Well,
but
then the time wouldn't make a difference.
No, so I'll tell you what it is. It's an old topic for us, at least, for some of us. And that is the topic of Eidei Chasima Karsi. Meaning there are two views in the Talmud. A few years ago, we discussed it extensively. There are two views about how a contract really works. Is it the evidence, that you place in the other person's hand? That's called a shtar be'edei chasima. It's a shtar raya, meaning, and the evidence, that's where the Bali Tosas came up with this very fascinating idea called muchach mitocho, which means the contract has to be self-sufficient. Meaning, even if it was given at different times, as long as that's not evident in the text of the shtar itself, that depends on an external corroboration. External corroboration has no role to play in a self-sufficient contract. That's the Baletosis view, the Rees view of Eidi Chasima Karsi. So for them, if it says the name of the day and nothing else in the text, even if you could prove, when it took place, that it took place at two different times, that's called an extraneous evidence, not a self-sufficient evidence, and that's irrelevant to the contract.
No, but I'm talking about where the time is very clear. However, if one holds that at the end of the day,
they wrote this contract was it was written to go into effect Tuesday at 4:00, and the other contract said Tuesday at 7:00.
But that's inconsistent with the idea that the contract only goes into effect the last minute of the day.
Right. I'm talking about a situation where it's not written in the contract, the hours.
So once it's written, that obviates the issue of last
Yeah, but
minute.
it's assuming that that's the intention, because it's like being written on a different day. Right? Just like if I have a contract for Tuesday and another contract for Wednesday or Thursday. So too, if I have a contract for 1:00 and I have another contract the same day for 3:00, assuming that in this particular venue, the hours matter, that's a decision. That's not so much a halachic decision. That's a
if the halacha would have said
what's customary in the place. So if it's what's a halachic decision is the following. Let's say hours matter, all things being equal, right? But if you had written it in, it would matter, right? But let's say the only evidence we have of it is external corroboration, not internal. It's not internal to the document. So that's a halachic question. If you hold Eidi Chasima Karsi and Muchach Mitocho, then we'd say we don't care, because that's what a contract is. A contract is the self-sufficient evidence that it provides. And if you need outside knowledge or information, then that's irrelevant to the contract.
No one holds that the limitation to the timing is by the day only, and anything after that doesn't mean anything, no matter what you wrote.
Right.
Because Monday is Monday, no matter when it was, and Tuesday is Tuesday, no matter when it was.
Right. If they hold it, if that's the practice in the place, then you're basically right. You have the whole day to write a contract.
You can't override it by putting in the time. You can't override that factor by putting in the time.
Not if the customary, legal agreement is that it's irrelevant. Unless the parties agree.
That's the exception. Generally speaking, the time does count.
Yeah. So typically it's not written in. And then the question is, but let's say you can prove it, but only externally and not internally. That becomes the question. Okay. Anyways, getting back to Kol Alam Gavar. So I wanted to look at the Shita Mekubetza. The Shita Mekubetza who disagrees about round 1, that's on page 2. Everybody have Shita Mekubetza Spav Basra Lamadal and Omid Base?
Yeah.
Yes,
okay.
Thank you.
So he says, Al Masha Kosef Harash B'Psakov Komisha Tigaver Yado B'Pam Rishona. He says, regarding what the Rosh wrote, that there's only one encounter to determine this. Kosef B'Shita Lo Noda Lami, an anonymous text. He said, the Elu Dvarim Einam Brurim Etzli. He said, this is not clear to me at all. Why should this be true? So listen to his reasoning. Chatam she'amar kol da'alam gavar b'bnei she'ein bezin zkukim lizakek ledinim. The reason that we say kol da'alam gavar is because the bezin doesn't want to engage with it, because there's not enough evidence. It's below the standard that bezin uses, and therefore they're not paskening. It's not a din. They're basically withdrawing, disengaging, and they're allowing it, just to solve itself.
Yeah.
If that's the case, Kim de Leka Drora Mamona Latravayu, Valeka Lamekam Alod de Milsa, the Kim Chakain Noach Lanicham Lasas Kirtzon, then why not just let them figure it out on their own? Velonasa Anudin Sheyachalava Lide Tos. Hilkach, therefore, Komisha Miskaber Yada Bekopam, Hare Brishuso, Adsha de Gaber Yada Echad, Obizroa, Oberaya, either with might or with proof. So the Shita Mekubetzes is saying there's no limit, but that's because he's taking a disengagement view. That's very important. So the Shulchan Aruch, by the way, again, Shulchan Aruch is so influenced by the Torah. The Torah was the son of the Rush. The Rush felt this very strongly. So the Shulchan Aruch paskins like the Rush. But the Shach disagrees. The Shach says, listen, I am surprised, he said, that the author of the Shulchan Aruch, who had such a big library, he wrote the work by Beis Yosef on the tour. If you ever read the Beis Yosef on the tour, you see what a magnificent access he had to all the svarim of his time, practically. Like he knew them, he had
Or
them.
he knew them by heart.
Yeah. So he says, I don't understand why the Beis Yosef isn't quoting, this is the Shach talking, the Hagos Ashri and the Hagos Mordechai and the Maram-Rutenberg he says, I think the Shach says, here, I'll just look at it for a second. He says, I think that this is on page 4. I think it's on page 4. In mine, it's on page 4. Oh, maybe not. Maybe it's on page 3. Where it says, Shacho Shemishpat Simin Kuf Lametes.
Page 4.
Afim Tigaver Yodei Ein Manichin. Shach says, Ein the Kamon Simin Reish Mem Hey, Sifyad Aleph, V'das Hatosis Per Kamon the Bamitzia, the Vavam Aleph, Dibur Masel V'Hacha, Ubagos Mordechai, V'Agos Ashri, V'Haguda B'Shem Ari, Nir L'Hedjadim Chazer V'Tokfa Mimenu Zacha, Ein Sham. Chenu Bagos Maimunus B'Sof Perik Yud, the Toin Vuvo B'Tshuva Samabit, B'She'elo Shnios, Uladati, says the Shach, in my opinion, there are all these other views. Shulchan Aruch ignored them. Ishtamit the Beis Yosef. The Beis Yosef omitted, in his presentation, all these opposing views. Kol hanach mechabrim, shari lo haviyim b'sifra Beis Yosef klal. What he's not saying is, wow, I mean, that's so atypical because the Beis Yosef is usually this, very
Didn't
expensive.
the Beis
Almost,
Yosef basically rely on 3 Rishonim for his decision?
no, I mean, again, that's in terms of, that's, as I said, I think you asked me that last time. It's a rule of thumb idea, meaning mostly, but either way, the Rambam doesn't take a stand on this issue. The Rif doesn't take a stand. The only one who takes a stand on this issue
Well, that's why
is the Rush.
that's why he took the rush.
Yeah, but he's trying to show Bali. Tosus disagree. Hilkach nira ladina, says the Shach. Dim chazav v'takva ein motzi and miyado kiven de plukta de rabusahi v'gam rubaninu. So there's another interesting argument between, if you look at the next piece, look at the next piece in Shulchan Aruch. It says davar shaposkim cholkim bo v'lo tafas chad minayu. So this is the following case. Normally, when we have a Kol Da'alam Gavar case, what's the argument revolve around? The facts of the case.
Yeah.
One guy says this is my boat. The other guy says it's my boat. He says it's my father's boat. He says it's my father's.
Unresolvable.
But what happens? Let's say there's a din Torah that revolves around a legal issue, an undecided legal issue. Let's say there's an argument between, let's say, I don't know, the Rambam and the Ravid, and we don't know how to paskin, right? So, and that's going to determine whether Reuven gets the property or Shimon gets the property. Will you ever say Kol Da'alam Gavar? You can't resolve the dispute for whatever reason. Normally we're able to figure out
The obligation of future generations to resolve the issue. In other words, we need a
no. That's a question. I mean, you can't clarify it. Meaning, we don't know how to, for whatever, for this generation, we're not taking any, for whatever reason. It's it's an equal machlokes bedina. Okay, Rav Moshe Feinstein paskins this way, the Rav Soloveitchik paskin that way, and Rav Shlomo Zalman, paskin this way, and Rav Yashiv paskin that. It's like equal. You don't want to, we're called, what is this? It's a safek dina. We have these in halacha till it gets resolved. If you have a bezdin, a gadol, like you have a Supreme Court of Jewish law, so eventually they decide, right? But if you, in the absence of that, you don't always have the ability, to decide right away. So there are things that are called safek dina. Safek dina means that the question mark stems from not a factual dispute, but a legal dispute. So what the Shulchan Aruch says is, under certain conditions, you can have kol da'alim gavar, even when there is a legal dispute, right? Imlo shaykh bechaluka kol da'alim. This is a statement really of the Trumas Hadeshen, right? The Trumas Hadeshen was a very important Ashkenaz posek. Either you can say in the end of the Rishonim or the beginning of the Achronim. It's like in the Neverland of of that time period, 15th century. So the Trumas Hadeshen says in certain cases, it's based on earlier sources, of Mordechai and Gittin and others. He says if there's a Safek Dina, occasionally you'll say Kol Alam Gava. So the Shach was, I'm not going to read the whole piece, it's a very long piece. The Shach was like scandalized by this.
Happy.
He said, how could you, and he wrote, the Shach wrote a separate book called Tukva Kohen, based on the Gemara in Bava Metzia Vav Amud Aleph. His Tukva Kohen is all about what do you do in cases, where there's a dispute and you can't, what if somebody grabs it in a state of dispute, things like that. So in Tukva Kohen, he's more expansive, but here he makes reference to what he wrote in Tukva Kohen as well. And he says, how could you say Kol Da'alim Gavar in a Safek Dina, especially if you hold like the Rosh? What is the Rosh's idea?
That the person will be more aggressive. There's nobody to be aggressive.
That the person the real owner will be more tenacious, more aggressive.
There's no
and
real
likely, and the other guy will give up more easily because it's a lark for him. He's not really invested, and he's going to probably lose anyway. But that's not true if it's a Safek Dina.
What's the alternative? What's the alternative? It's easy to criticize.
Whatever. It's not our problem right now to figure out what the alternative is. But the point is that you won't say Kol Da'alim Gavar. There are other things you can say. You can say Shuda D'Daina, you can say Yachloku, you can say Hey Munachat Shiava Leo. There are other things to say. But the point is that the psychology of the Rush doesn't apply when there's a Safek Dina. Because neither side knows who nobody knows who right? It's an objective doubt. However, let's say Kol Da'alim Gavar means we can't decide this on the basis of evidence, so we're going to be disengaging from it. Can that apply to Safek Dina? Sure, why not? They're saying, listen, we don't have the means to say anything decisive here, right? And we're not going to tarnish the standards and therefore ultimately the confidence of Klal Yisrael in the Bezdin system by getting involved in something that that they don't have real substance to contribute. So we're going to disengage. And how are you going to solve this? Let them fight it out. Can you say that? Yeah. So here I just wanted to bring to everybody's attention the Rambam also. It's very fascinating that the Rambam doesn't really paskin this halacha. He just mentions it here. This is Perek. 1 second. What page was this? Look on page 3 for a moment. Everybody see the Rambam Hilchos Toain V'Niton Perek Tesvav Halacha Dalid?
Yes.
Yes.
Excellent. Thank you. So the Rambam says, Shnaim Shahoyu Orin al Asadeh. 2 people were arguing, claim and counterclaim. They were disputing the ownership of a field. Zeomer Shali, Zeomer Shali, each one claiming it's his. The Ein Le'echad Mehem Raya. Neither one has evidence. This is the Rambam mentioned before. What if they both have evidence, but equal evidence? Oh, shehevi kolechad mehem edim shi shalo, o shalavosa, or both of them have equal evidence, but obviously that's a problem because they can't both. Something is fishy. Oh, shehevi kolechad mishneim edim she'achla shnei chazaka, v'shnaim she'idu behem elu, hein shnaim atzmun she'idu behen elu. So what do you do in all these cases? The answer is called Alim Gavar. How does the Rambam describe Kol Da'alim Gavar? Menichano sabideyim. You just, disengage. You leave it. The Kol HaMiskaber, Yered ba. Whoever, is able to overcome the other will take over. The ha'acher motzi miyado v'alav haraya.
I
Now,
mean,
what is
historically, if you think about it, we have this whole union of the Tos Bezdin requires a korban when they make a big mistake.
Yeah.
So it would seem to indicate that the easy way out of sort of saying we don't know was not used in those times, okay? Because it was sort of common knowledge that mistakes of this nature would happen. So it seems, maybe I'm grasping at straws, but it would seem that the idea that Bezdin should take, so to speak, the easy way out. Well, we don't know what to do, but it didn't. I mean, they have to take a position. Sometimes they're going to be wrong.
Again, the case of Tos Bezdin, Horios cases are pretty rare, and they're on usually they're on difficult issues. But what's unique about the Rambam here is that he's using what Rambam does something that the Gemara didn't do and that the other Rishonim didn't do. But you just have to be very, your antennae have to be, very pointed to it, very sensitive to it. And that is he's using Kol Alim Gavar to create a de facto Motzi Mechaber Olav Haraya. Look at the last line again. Menichino sabidei. I mean, it doesn't say.
Everybody agrees to that.
What?
Everybody agrees to that.
No.
Rush agrees to that because he says once the guy has it, he keeps it unless you bring a raya.
Yes, but that's true. The words are true, but it's not based on creating a tfisa. We're saying in the interim, we consider him to be the interim solution owner. The Rambam's not saying he's an owner. All the Rambam's saying is he has the status of somebody who is a toe-face. And therefore the other fellow has to bring a raya. The words the other fellow has to bring a raya can be applied in two ways. It can be, if I'm the owner and Bezdin is finding for me, then of course, if the other person wants to prove it's not so, he has to bring a raya. But there's another case where he has to bring a raya, and that's just all I have to be is the toe-face, meaning I have possession. So what the Rambam's saying here is something very, very fascinating, subtle, but very fascinating. The Rambam's saying Kol Alim Gavar is a mechanism that, again, I'm going to take a step back. Let me add something based on what we spoke about last week and the week before.
We need to have a
Normally, we have a rule that says "Ein tfisa lachar leidas hasafek." No, you can't grab the object and say, "Oh, it's in my possession." Once everybody knows that there's a dispute. The Rambam is basically saying there's an exception to that rule. And that is when Bezdin says we don't know what to do, so then there can be a tfisa lachar leidas hasafek. That's what Kol Alim Gavar is.
So in a way, the Rambam is agreeing with the Rosh's societal approach in a way.
I don't know about this. No,
he's saying there has to be some basis for
no, I don't think so.
In other words, somebody has to be the muhsik.
Yes, that's true. But I think, while the Rush is adding a dimension of birur because of the psychology, the Rambam's not doing anything.
I'm talking about the first round approach.
Yes, he agrees with the Rush about the first round, but not as policy as much as legally. That's now Motzi Mechaber Olav Haraya.
So it's not a societal issue by
right. Now I want to go back. We have to finish in a minute, but I want to go back to the tshuva of the Rush now. And then next week we'll speak about the Kuf Yud Zayin. Next week we'll speak about Hanukkah, but maybe after that we'll speak about Kuf Yud Zayin, and then we'll move forward. Let's look for a minute at the tshuva of the Rush. This is very interesting. Here the Rush says it's psychology here too. It's the third place. It says you have the on page 2 or at the end of page 1. Shuta Rush, Klal Ayin Zayin Siman Aleph.
Yeah.
Okay.
The top of page 2.
How many times, or for how many times they have the option to all the Alim Gvar? According to the Rush, they have only one opportunity to do this, called Alim Gvar.
Right. And Rambam also.
Wait a minute. If you are Rambam, it is 2. Because the first one, just a minute, the first time he is tofes, he went to the field, he create fact, הוא תופס. So
Right.
he is the אלים. אבל the other side, after that, if he has a proof, he can
No,
come.
no, no, that's
No?
not. Anytime there's proof, everybody agrees. Whenever there's real proof, whoever brings the proof wins. This is only if there's no proof.
After the תפיסה. After
Even
the
after,
תפיסה.
no, doesn't after anything. Even after the sivuv harishon shel harash, im hasheni mevi edut or raya, hu menatzeach. All this is in a situation where there's no definitive raya. That's not called. Anytime you say called the alam gavar, if it's overridden by a raya, by a real raya. According to Rambam, according to Rosh, according to Shittim Kubetzet, according to Shach, everybody agrees. Hakol modim. It's only if we don't or until we have more evidence that we speak about called the alam gavar. Okay, I want to finish with this Rosh. The Rosh has a tshuva, but what's fascinating about it, you'll see that the language that he uses, if you pay close attention, between what he wrote in Bava Basra and we read before, and Bava Metzia also, you'll see he changes his mind about the emphasis a little bit. If you remember, in when it came to Bava Basra, he used the expression dinahu, right? Go look to Bava Basra first for one more second. The Rosh in Bava Basra. On the first line, I called the alam gavar dinahu, right? And then he repeats it again.
His definition of dinahu means it's a din drabonim?
No, not necessarily, but elachachamim pasku kol da'alim b'pamazos. So the Rambam uses the Rosh in Bava Basra uses the expression dinahu and psak. I'm going to show you in the tshuva, even though he mostly says what he says in the other places, but he says lo dinahu v'lo psaku. So look at the tshuva, you'll see what I mean. He starts off.
Maybe the case lent itself to the same solution, even though it didn't have those two.
No, it's the same case, same called alam gavar. You'll see in a moment. Mori she'eri, he's addressing a relative of his. She'er basar means a relative, right? I don't know which relative, whatever. His name was from Shlomo Halevi. Okay, a little bit of biography for the.
As Mori must have been a
Talmud Chacham, Rabbi of some sort, an older, relative. Mori She'er Rav Shlomo Halevi, Yafek Kasavta. You wrote what you write is. I agree with what you wrote. What did he write?
Aladin.
Aladin shenifsak called alam gavar. So this is what happened. The gavar yad ha'echad, Ruvain emerged victorious in his contest with Shimon, the tafas, and now he is in control of the object. Shekenegdo, this is the chiddush that they're talking about. Yochol lahashbio shebedin tafas. Even though Shimon is the interim loser, he has the right to say to Ruvain, I insist, if you're going to keep it, even though I say it's mine, but you won the round one, and that's what counts, I insist you can only keep it if you take a shvua, an oath, that it's yours. At least give me satisfaction that you're taking.
Makes sense. Why should this be better than Eid Echad?
Now, this is not a shvua daraisa. This will be a shvua drabanan, right? But there's no Eid Echad. There is no Eid Echad here.
No, I'm saying it's a lower level. So if one is required at Eid Echad, one will be
so what's mechudash here? The Prisha, in his commentary on the Torah, says this is very mechudash, because Kol Alam Gavar is just an interim solution. Where do we find a shvu on an interim solution? Question. That's number one. Number two, and this is what the Rosh is going to address himself.
By the way, if he maybe
one second. The other opposite point is, forget about being an interim solution. Bezdin basically, is granting him this victory. Why does he need to In addition, how does the guy have the right to impose a shvu on him? They did their contest. He won the contest.
Maybe imposing the shvua gives him permanent right to it.
No, no, not if there's evidence. So listen
Just
to
the
how
fact
the
that
listen how the Rosh explains it.
plaintiffs could actually impose a shavua. What gives him the authority to do so?
That's the question. Well, he's the injured party. There's a shvua drabanan. It's called shekenegdo nishba v'notel. But right, he only, what, as you say, if the bezin is found in favor of Ruvain, how does Shimon have recourse to demand more?
Yes.
So listen to what the Rosh says. He says, "V'hada paskinan kol alam gavar." The reason is because it's lav dinahu. Remember, he just said a minute ago, not a minute ago, in his commentary to Bal Basra, he said dinahu. Here he says lav dinahu. Bezdin Posco. It's not as if it's a din such that he can say Bezdin Poskuli. It's a psak. Bezdin's on my side. Don't tell me you want a shvua. That's what the Torah is. The Bezdin said called Elam Gavar. We did called Elam Gavar. Bezdin's on my side. It's a din and a psak. Isn't that what he called it in Bava Basra?
Yeah.
Called Elam Gavar. The Gavar Yadi. The Zachisi Mikoach. Bezdin. With the imprimatur of the courts. The Ainli Lishava. And therefore, why do I have to swear? You don't have no right to ask me to swear. I underwent the process, and this is what the process.
Hey, look, he didn't really have the imprimatur of the court.
That's what I want to get to. So, what the Rosh says is, Ela machma she'ein bezdin yichol levar shomiu. The ein shemechad mehem muchzak amru chazal kol da'alim gavar. The Rosh says it's not true that this is a psak and this is a din, even though that is the expression he used above Basra and above Metzia. He's saying, really, it's a siluk. What else do you want them to do? They don't have a raya. The samchu chachamim al zeh, ki osa shamamun shelo yasim nafsho bekapo, lihilachem, shelo yigzal acher, mamono. He's just going to be very aggressive and tenacious. Shaker lo tarach kulahai. The thief isn't going to work so hard because, it's not worth the investment for him. It's only a lark. The gam yarei shema yimatze halo edim lachar zman shushalo b'tzarich l'chatzir. The kimin delav dinahu, opposite of the language that he uses in Bava Basra. It's not a din. It's an arrangement. It's a disengagement. Matzi idach l'meimar ishtabali debedin tefasta. It's not like Bezin didn't find on behalf of Ruvain. Bezin gave an arrangement how we could, temporarily settle the strife.
Sort of a passive.
One second, because I have to stop. So I'm skipping a little bit. I'm skipping about 5 lines. Hilkach, can everybody find that? I skipped about 5 lines.
Adif.
I was at the word tafasto. Go down 6 lines. You'll see the word in the middle of the page. Yeah. No, Hilkach nistalku. Everybody have that? Hilkach nistalku chachamim mimim. V'amru kol da'alam gavar. Ulai yitbarer hadavar la'achar zman shomihu. V'samchu ktsas ala svara shekasavti la'el. This is a very big corrective. The Rosh's tshuvas are normally considered to have been written, I think I mentioned this last week also,
End of his life.
at the end of his life when he already was in Spain. But this is an important corrective. While in Bava Basra and Bava Metzia, in his Perush, he writes that it's a din, it's a psak, and it's not so clear how convinced is he about the psychology. Here, he's mostly saying, just because there is a foundation to think that maybe this will work, doesn't mean it's a din and doesn't mean it's a psak.
Could it maybe not be 180?
It's still, one second, it's still only a siluk, meaning a disengagement. And therefore, well, if the guy's going to keep it, then let him at least take a shvua, because the fact that Bezin told him to engage in this process, and this was the end result, doesn't prove it's his. It only allows him to keep it temporarily until you can do something better. So what's fascinating is, I mentioned the Prisha said, I don't think this is so obvious, because either it's only an interim psak, and maybe when do we ever find a shvua in an interim psak, Or maybe Bezdin's really finding for him, in which case, how does he have the right to impose a shvu on the other guy? So the Prisha says, I don't know why the Shulchan Aruch thinks it's so obvious that we should paskin like the Rosh. But again, the Rosh was so influential on this topic that through his son, the Tur, and then through the Beis Yosef and Shulchan Aruch, this is the psak. And if you look at, we'll stop here, but if you look at the Shulchan Aruch back on page 4, the first psak says, Shnaim shechalukim b'davar, two people arguing, ein shemechad mehem muksak bo, neither one is in control. Like the case of the boat where people are arguing. The kolchad amar didihu, kol da alim gavar, v'osa shetagaber yado tchila, whoever wins round number 1, that's the rush, hu shalo. Ad sheyavi ha'acherai, unless the other person brings evidence to the contrary. Then he adds miu, shekenegdo yachal lahashbio. However, the other guy, if he insists, even in the interim, he can say, I force you to take a shvuah. V'tzarech lishava shehu shalo. I'm just trying to show you the genesis. How does the Shulchan Aruch, the answer is there's centuries of discussion of the same thing. Everybody's trying to figure it out. And, you have to make decisions. So this Shulchan Aruch paskins like both views of the Rosh.
But
The Rosh in the Tshuva and the Rosh in Bava Basra.
both cases, it could be that he's not taking 180-degree difference. In one case, he talks about it as a din because it's an active action of
Yeah,
Bezdin.
he might be
In the
right.
second case, it's a passive act.
Either way, I wanted to draw
Same effect, but when it's a passive act, maybe it's not called dina anymore.
meaning I wanted to draw attention factually to the fact that he uses opposite language, which he does. There's above Basra and above Metzia, he says dinahu, psaku, and in the tshuva, when he's trying to explain a nuance about the shvua, he says it's not really a din and a psak, right? So that's factually just different. I think you're probably right in the sense that also he says ktsas smach. I don't think he changed his mind. I think it was always, that it's always a very subtle idea.
It may be that in order to require shua, you need an active act of
No,
Bezdin.
I hear you.
This, he says, is not that kind of a dina. It's a passive act of Bezdin, which has
Relative to the kind of things.
in
that
most
we-
cases has the same effect, except you can't get a shua. That's a big jump forward. To get that, you need the Bezdin to.
it's not a stira, it's not a contradiction, it's a contextual thing, but it's still very interesting that he would use words, opposite words. But what I'm trying to say is what it highlights is this whole thing is very subtle to begin with. Like, what is it? Bezdin saying this is how to go, but it isn't really a birur, but it isn't really a psak, but it's, it has the blessing of Bezdin, but not their active, imprimatur. So it's always something in between. It's a very, very intriguing legal idea. Okay, I want to speak about Bava Kama Kufyud Zayin, and then I want to move on to other things to probably give you another Marmakomos. Next week, we'll speak about a topic in Hanukkah, because it's the 7th. It'll be the 7th night of Hanukkah. So it's Zoom, but we'll do something on Yonei Hanukkah. And then we will continue with Bamitzia and finish this and then move on to another topic. We'll start moving a little more quickly through the Dapim in the week after that. Okay?
Yesher koach.
Okay.
Chag Sameach.
Everybody should have a Hanukkah Sameach and all good things.
Thank you.
Amen.
Sameach.